so very brief introduction. Rob Mermin ran off to join the circus in 1969 and studied the art of mime with Marcel Marceau, an accomplished performer, entrepreneur, author, lecturer, playwright, and director. Rob founded the award-winning international touring company Circus Smirkus in Greensboro, Vermont. So that was very short, and I'm sure Rob will talk more. So please welcome Rob Mermin. Thank
you. Why do people always assume that mimes are going to talk more? Circle of Sawdust is the title of this book. I will start off by reading the prelude, very short prelude, which explains the title. Circle of Sawdust. When the circus packs up its tent and travels in the middle of the night, the grassy lot leaves little trace the circus had ever been there. The only sign is a faint circle of sawdust in the middle of the field where the ring had been. If you stand in that circle after the circus has moved on, you feel a shaft of energy that lingers for a few days and suffuses the air with smells of popcorn, sawdust, hot dogs, cotton candy, and the pungent scent of mud, manure, hay, and animal musk. If you close your eyes, you can summon up faint sounds of children laughing, squeaky rubber balloons, the excited after-show chatter of the audience wandering out into the night, the ringing hammer of sledge loosening heavy iron tent stakes, trucks being loaded with bleachers, poles, and canvas. It is the echo of the circus come and gone. If some youngster wanders out and happens to stand inside that magical circle of sawdust, who is to say they might not catch a whiff of wanderlust as the wind swirls around and plants a sense of adventure into their daydreams? Thank you. I had a lot of fun in my research for this book because I wanted to put my story in the context of circus history. And you may know that circus goes way back a couple of centuries, even in this country, but circus, until recently, has always had a very sleazy reputation. Circus people are disreputable, dishonest, sleazy, right? So in my research, I found a lot of great quotes from newspapers from the late 1800s. And I put at the beginning of every chapter a quote from either a Vermont newspaper in the 1890s or from Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey root books. The root books were the daily journals that someone in the company kept a record of everything that went on that day. The population of the town, the number of attendees to both shows, the weather, any anecdotes that happened during the day. So I found a lot of great quotes from the 1800s from them too. I'll read a few of those so you get the sense of how my story, running off to the circus in Europe, fits into circus history. Not a lot has changed, let me put it that way. Here's the Burlington Free Press and Times in Vermont, July 27th, 1883. Quote, "It is with circus going as it is with sin. One sin is always followed by a long procession of others. He who goes to the circus is lost forever." No argument. The Vermont Phoenix, Brattleboro, Vermont, 1859. Quote, "No one will pretend that circuses are schools of morality. But to be amused and astonished must be worth something hygienically. Will we learn nothing from this?" I have no idea what that really means. The Herald and Globe Rutland, Vermont, July 26, 1883. And this is a quote from the newspaper about the circus parade before the show even started. Quote, "There were 2 lively runaways yesterday morning, but no great damage was done. One of the elephants in the procession ran against a street gas lamp and somewhat demoralized it." Oh, man. You gotta love the language from journalists back then. Just a couple of more of these because they're so fun. This is from a Ringling Root book in Wisconsin, July 4th, 1891. Quote, "Big top sideshow and horse tents flagged in extravagant style. At night, grand spread eagle fireworks, big bonfires built, and a century's worth of pyrotechnics fired, whose constant sheaves of golden rain kept up a quiet flirtation with the stars." I mean, yeah. Do they write like that anymore, Rob Gerrit? I think you do. Oh, maybe 1 or 2 more of these. The Farmer's Herald, St. Johnsbury, Vermont, 1831. This is getting pretty early. Quote, "The circus saw fit to come parading into our quiet little village on the last Sabbath. Legislative enactments are needed to guard the community against these baleful influences." Yeah. Actually, that's a good segue into talking about the Vermont laws back in the day. Here, I write a little bit about that in one of the later chapters as I'm trying to get Circus Smirkus started, which took years. The Vermont legislature of 1836 introduced a law that stipulated, quote, "All circus riding, theatrical exhibitions, juggling or sleight of hand, ventriloquism, and magic acts shall be and are declared to be common and public nuisances and offenses against this state. Transgressors were to be fined $200. I mean, yeah, back then, 1830s. However, those were also the days when a lot of towns around the state started building their opera houses specifically for magic acts and theatricals and ventriloquism. But finally, Governor Richard Snelling in 1991 issued a proclamation, quote, "to wipe out any lingering remnant of Vermont as an anti-circus state." Circus Smirkus was thereby officially recognized by the Vermont General Assembly as the only tenting circus based in Vermont. We were the unofficial state circus. No applause yet. I had applied to I think it was even the governor back then. I wanted the state to recognize Circus Smirkus as the official state circus. And my argument was, we would then be the only state in the Union that had an official state circus. How great would that be? The response was, only something permanent, like a fish, a bird, a tree, could be designated the official state, something or other. I took what I could get. Recognition was enough. I certainly will have time for questions afterwards, but I'm wondering, as I go along, if something pops into your mind and you want me to elaborate or answer a question, just throw it at me. I've done a few readings so far, and actually, one of the questions that I do get asked was, why? Why did I run off to join the circus? Good question. I kind of made up an answer for that. Let me, which is true, but I had to think a lot about it. When people ask me that question, why did you run off to the circus? Why did you want to be a clown? Writing this book, several themes started to pop out at me when the book was done. And one of the themes I realized was that in America, circuses, clowns, mimes, and animals were topics that people didn't want to relate to circus as an artistic endeavor. Circuses were sleazy affairs, clowns were scary. You know, kids grow up afraid of clowns. What's that all about? Same thing with mimes. I mean, I'm afraid of mimes these days. And animals should be banned from the circus. This is a very American sensibility. And, you know, I was wondering myself, why is that? So I'm hoping that the stories I tell in this book can somewhat alleviate the distaste about circus and clowns and mimes that we have in this country. In the introduction, I write a few things. Here's one. During the political traumas of 1968, I was in college, draft age, living outside Chicago. Friends marched in civil protests, and inflamed political debate hung in the air like angry thunderclouds. I disliked the fervency of crowds. My radicalism was quieter. I wondered how I could best contribute artistically to the kind of world we envisioned. What would a society feel like in which there was humor without malice, laughter without scorn, common sense in public discourse, decency in human relations, delight in sharing skills without aggressive competition? Circus became a physical symbol for the community I envisioned and a vehicle for everything I loved doing in the arts. And a little bit later on, I write, here was a goal, to set out in search of apprenticeship under circus canvas. Here was the dream that followed, to make it in that world and ultimately pass on the legacy to young people by creating a new circus company that would bridge the traditional and the modern. I would find an unconventional lifestyle of renewable adventure. Why not? So does that partially answer the question? Why did I want to run off to the circus? And what was it about circus? I had never seen a little traveling circus in my hometown as a kid. I never envisioned wanting to grow up and be a clown. That was not my intent at first. But I remember reading National Geographic, Life magazine growing up, and there were articles about traditional circus in Europe and around the world. How close-knit circus families were, where kids are working with their siblings and their parents and their aunts and uncles and grandparents, all travel together, pass on the family profession from generation to generation. What other profession can you think of that does that for 5 or 6 generations? You know, I can't think of one. You know, a plumber might pass on his skills to a son or a daughter, but for 5 or 6 generations? Circus, I think, is kind of unique in world culture that way. Did you say
farming?
Agriculture.
Farming, agriculture, perhaps.
Yeah.
Both agriculture and circus, very difficult things to keep going. They involve animals. And that's another question. I could talk about animals in circus a little bit later. But I wanted to find out what that lifestyle was all about that the articles were writing. Traditional culture, traditional circus. And I found out, and I was tremendously impressed by children of circus artists. And by circus artists, I mean families who've been in it 5, 6, 7 generations. Most of the circuses back in the 60s and 70s when I was there in Europe were run by family dynasties. A little 10-year-old kid could automatically speak 3 languages, understands geography, is not scared to stand up and talk directly to an adult and look them in the eye. I was never like that as a kid. You know, we were all segregated by age in school. You know, a kid a grade or 2 ahead of us would never talk to us, and we wouldn't talk to kids behind us normally, elementary school or high school. Segregation by age is our educational system. Not in the circus. Again, circus kids, they often have tutors going on with them on tour, but mainly it's homeschooling. Kids traveling with their families, learning as they go, and not only learning schooling kinds of things, but learning a skill and talents. So that's sort of my answer to myself. Why did I run off to find out what that culture is all about? A different way of life. And, you know, many of us have apartments or homes that are pretty cluttered. In a circus, you can't have clutter because you're living out of caravans. You know, the whole family is living in caravans, so you take what you need along with you. It's a great lesson. Any questions? Oh,
I have a quick question.
yeah.
Did you have any circus skills in your pocket when you went to Europe?
Good question. I like to think I did. I didn't really. I had taught myself to juggle, to balance on a wire. I had been doing some theater in high school, but I didn't really have skills. I learned on the road from circus people once I got in there. But I tell you, circus tests you. It ain't easy. And that's kind of what this book is about too. All the early stories of my first circuses that I bumped into tested me to such a degree that I don't know why I kept it up. I'm glad I did. I remember how I taught myself to juggle. 4th grade, we were doing a science project in 4th grade. The teacher was Miss Rodriguez. She was beautiful. Long black hair, Spanish looking, young. All of us were enamored by her. We had to do a science project, so I chose ambidexterity. I wanted to figure out why my left hand couldn't do the things my right hand could do. It's not fair. So I took up juggling by myself. I didn't have any teacher. And that was part of my project for the 2 or 3 weeks, was to be doing everything I could with my left hand. And when you're juggling, those of you who know how to juggle, you have to use both sides of the body equally. And I came to the conclusion that it's not that the left hand can't do a lot of things my right can do, it's just that it had a different function. And I discovered that playing baseball. I discovered that batting, I could place hit pretty well, right-handed. Left-handed, I wasn't as accurate, but I had more power. So if I was going for the home run, I would bat lefty. Thank you, lefty. It's okay, he says. So, you know, when parents ask me about circus and all that, and they have kids, young kids, I really try to encourage them to not to run off and join the well, I do. Run off and join Circus Smirkus, yeah. But I encourage them to let their kid daydream. And when I talk to teachers, I say, daydreaming should be a subject in elementary school. Part of every day in school. Because daydreaming, as we all know, that's when you try out things. You try out future scenarios. And your mind can wander into places that if you're too structured, your mind won't go there. So daydreaming, for me, is a very important pastime. Still is. Any other questions yet?
Why did you get into pantomime? What led you to pantomime?
What led me to the art of pantomime? Marcel Marceau. I saw him on TV with Red Skelton in 1965 on the Red Skelton Hour. A lot of you would remember that. Weekly variety show. You know, Red Skelton, he would tell jokes and do funny skits, but he was a great pantomime himself. And he was friends with Marceau. And I was 15 at the time, watching the show with my family at home. And here comes the Red Skelton Hour. It was just Skelton and Marceau. That was it. No talking for the full hour.
Oh, wow.
Skelton did some solo mime pieces, Marceau did, then they did some together. I was fascinated and intrigued. And then it was 1968 or 69. I think it was the winter of 69. I was in college out at Lake Forest College, as Dean and Sally were. And Marceau was performing somewhere north, maybe Madison, Wisconsin. I got in a car and drove through the winter to get to see his show. The show started at 8 o'clock. I got there at 7:45 in the snowstorm, sold out.
Oh,
When you're 19, you just don't say sold out, sorry. So I walked around the block. I found some alleyway, went down there. It was snowing. There was a door that was unlocked, went in that door, through some empty offices. Another door opened up, and it was all these winter coats in a closet. The light suddenly went on in that coat room. And the guy's looking at me, and I'm standing there. He says, "You here to help?" "Yes, sir." "Well, quick, grab those folding chairs. You know, we're putting them up in the back so the staff could see the show, because, you know, Marceau is sold out." I said, "That's why I'm here, sir." I remember putting up the seats and sat right down. In the back of the program, there was a note that said, Marcel Marceau will be opening the first international mime school in Paris, October 3rd, that coming fall, 10 a.m. at the Théâtre de la Musique in Paris. So I wrote a letter thinking, you know, how do I audition? What's the process? I got a form letter back, just a one-page form letter. Didn't even have my name on the form. It just said, classes begin 10 o'clock, you know, Théâtre de la Musique. I didn't know what that meant. I showed it to my dad. And my dad, bless his heart, gave me permission to have an adventure. He said, "Well, you'll never know what this means until you go over and find out." Yeah, wow. My dad. So I went over and found out. You know, I walked up to the Théâtre de la Musique, 10 a.m. Sure enough, Marceau's brother was standing on the steps. He was Marceau's manager at the time. I told him my name. He said, "Oh, yes." Checked me off. Went in. So, you know, young people, they ask me questions about, well, you ran away to the circus, Rob, and got lucky with this and this. It was fortuitous, destiny. Can people still do that? They ask. I said, damn right they can. Why not? You just show up. It's so easy for young people now with their computers and you know, online this and online that, and it doesn't matter. Still show up. Just show up. See what happens. And unlikely things will happen. That if you planned everything too specifically, I'm going to follow this and this and this and this and this and this, and you follow that plan, there's no room for outside providence to throw interesting things at you. This is what I tell the young folks, because I write about those stories, and when I read some of this book now, I think, good Lord. what was I thinking? Or is that really me? It's like a movie script. The things that happened to me were because I kicked my butt out the door and put myself into situations that I had no control over. And I remember very well, 19 years old, my philosophy at the time, and kind of still is, was nothing is going to happen if I don't kick my butt out the door and then get out of my own way, without a plan. Have an intention. My intention was to find a circus and learn, be an apprentice in the circus world. That was my intention. I kicked my butt out the door, hitchhiked over to Europe with $50 in my pocket. But that was it. I had no plan. I had no itinerary. Of course, there were no computers and GPS in those days to find a circus. Luckily, I left it up to Providence, destiny, fate, fortune, whatever you want to call it. But I had to have the intention first and take the first step on the path of adventure, then get out of your way. Have you found that too? Anybody? Yeah? Young people need to hear that kind of thing. Because, it worked for me. And Marceau, to come back to your question, mime was my first love. And then I did circus for years and years and created my own company. But now I'm coming back to mime again. Like you always come back to your first love. Because mime gave me a philosophy of how to move through the world. It's a metaphor, how to move literally through the world, yeah, but how to move in terms of gracefulness. Not motion and movement gracefulness, but your philosophy, your attitude, how you deal with people, how you think about the world. Mime gave me that because it's the power of silence. And one of the things that Marceau taught me was through observation. I'd be observing him. He was teaching technique and improvisation and all that great stuff. But he taught me a lot by my observing how he moved through the world. And here's a definition of mime that he often said, and pretty much these same words. He would say, the art of mime is the identification with the essence of all things that surround us, and the portrayal of human thought and emotion through physical, silent expression. Is that a mouthful? The identification with the essence of all things that surround us. People, humans, animals, nature. And to translate that literally in mime, for example, if you're going to create, you use space as though space were some tangible substance. You could push it, you can pull it. Space becomes something that you use to create imagery that's in your head and project it outwards. And just as a pure mime technique thing, he would say, if you're going to show somebody putting on a hat, what's the essence of the hat? It's your head. So don't just put the hat on your head, put the head into the hat. If you have a tie and you're going to tie a tie, what's the essence of tie-ness? It's your neck. So put a tie on, move your neck as you're putting it on. If you're sweeping, your leg and your whole body becomes the broom. So you start to associate with every object. When I used to teach mime, just one more example of the mime, because thank you for asking that question. I remember Marceau talking about eating. And drinking and having mime food. He said you have to feel it. You have to believe it yourself if people watching in the audience are going to feel it. And he said when you're reaching for an apple, the apple has weight. and shape. And as you're reaching for it, before you bite it, in a split second, what goes through your head is a farmer climbing up a little ladder to pick apples from the tree, put them in a basket, carry that basket into the kitchen, set the oven going, and cutting up the apples to make pies, and he puts the pie in the oven and turns the heat up, and you can start to smell the pie boiling in the oven, apple pie, and you take it out of the oven, and then take a bite out of the mime apple. You can taste it, you can smell it. So he had us identify with every object, the essence of every object. So I would go home after mime class and start to, well, we're always observing people in Paris, on the subway or in restaurants. How are they eating? How are they reaching for that glass? Is their elbow up? Is their elbow down? You know, do they lean forward to drink? Do they lean back? How are they doing it? And then you would try to imitate it so you know what the movements are. You could analyze every movement. You know, if I'm reaching for something over here, I don't just grab it. First it's my elbow, then the wrist, then the hand comes to pick up that glass. You put the glass down, wrist, elbow, arm. You know, it just happens naturally when you, after you've analyzed it, but you analyze every movement that you make literally to do mime. I would analyze every movement I would make metaphorically as I move through the world. That effectively took me away from the circus, didn't it? But one thing about the circus, when I first ran into the circus ring in Copenhagen, I was in, there's a beautiful circus building in Copenhagen, right downtown opposite the Tivoli Gardens. I was there for 3 years, 1973, 4, and 5. First time I ran into the ring, I had 2 partners, Peter, an English acrobat, and Antonio, who was a dwarf who had been a house clown there for 20 years. And I immediately sensed it was 2,000 seats in this circus building in the round, focusing down on one ring that was carpeted with a 16-piece orchestra in the balcony above the ring entrance. It was classy. I would run into the ring and realize right away that, wait a minute, I got to relax this mime technique. Be myself. I knew my movements would be okay because of the mime training. I didn't have to think about it. But to make a connection with the audience, I had to let go of technique and just be my own personality. Big lesson. And I was grateful to have learned the art of mime first, really, before running into the circus world. Other questions? Yes.
So you went to Europe to join the circus, and when did the mime school, when were you attending Marceau's school? And you just kind of went over there, and maybe you sort of answered this question when you were describing Marceau's teaching, but I assume that there might have been a language barrier?
Language barrier with a mime? No. And the timing of all that, to answer your question, I went off hitchhiking to find a circus in the beginning of summer '69. Had wild and crazy adventures with Circus Hoffman, which I write about. Real mud show that summer. And it was that, I think it was that very October, a few months later, I was in Paris with Marceau. And Marceau spoke a lot of languages. You know, as you could see, you get a mime talking and it's hard to stop him. But Marceau was even more so. I look up some of his interviews on YouTube and all. He was great. You know, he talked way up here, metaphorically, and brilliant man, smart, talented. He knew he was an icon. in world theater. I would say in the 20th century, the first half of the 20th century, the great mime was Charlie Chaplin, who became worldwide because of films. Second half of the 20th century was Marceau was the great mime. And both of them had iconic imagery. Chaplin, you know, with his cane and his little top hat, his little bowler hat. Marceau with his white face. I just lost my train of thought. Am I answering your question?
Well, I was asking about the language. I mean,
Oh.
you were traveling through Europe and
Yeah.
the circus.
Traveling with circuses, though, in European circus, it's not like a Danish circus only has Danish artists, you know, or German artists. Every circus is international. So there would be artists, you know, in this caravan. You know, dinner times were always great. You could walk around the circus site during dinner time, and the Germans would have their Bavarian meals, and the Chinese over here, and the French over there, and the common I think the most common language at that time, in the 70s, in circuses was German, actually, and then maybe English after that. But circus was always an international subculture, if we want to call it that. Really a world culture, kind of knowing no boundaries. You know? And I write in the book many times where it's like you have a circus. Once you're in the circus, you have a invisible circus passport. I would show up at a circus in Switzerland, I remember walking up to the box office, you know, to buy a ticket. And I would mention that I was in circus, you know, I was just coming from Circus Benneweis in Copenhagen. Oh, here's your seat, come on in. And they put the tea on, and it was just great. When you're in the circus, you have an international passport, basically.
I have a question for
Yes.
you. I'm just revisiting and watching again Children of Paradise and wondering if you know who plays the mime in that?
Yeah.
It's not Marcel.
No, this great French film from 1940s, filmed during the war, Children of Paradise, features Jean-Louis Barrault as the mime. And his father in the film is a man named Etienne Decroux, who was Marceau's teacher. And when I was in Paris, I had heard about this guy, Etienne Decroux. You know, even the master has a teacher. And he was still alive, teaching in his little basement studio. So a couple of years later, I went and studied with him. The master of the master, which was, again, an experience. I had written a letter, got no reply, to Etienne Decroux. So I showed up, knocked on the door. I had heard stories of him and his wife, because I had trained in Decroux technique with Canadian mime, Paul Golan. And he and I worked together. Golan was a master of Decroux technique. He'd been with Decroux for, I think, 3 or 4 years. So I'd learned Decroux's technique already, but I wanted to learn it from the master. I showed up on the door, knocked on the door, stood there. The door opens, Madame Decroux stands there, blocking the doorway, which was the entrance to her kitchen. And I could see behind her a big pot of soup, you know, that she'd been stirring, and she's standing like this. And I started to introduce myself, gave her my name, that I'd written a letter, slammed the door in my face. I was ready. Because Paul Golan had told me the stories about her. So on the metro, to get to their place, I had a book of French Romantic poetry. And I had studied 2 lines. I knocked on the door again. She stands there. And like a little schoolboy, you know, I stood there with my hands behind my back, and I recited this poem, which it was basically said, in French. In the garden of my grandfather, the flowers are all blooming. In the garden of my grandfather, all the birds are singing for the young girls who have no husbands. And she's like this. But the upshot of that story was every day going to class, if I did not recite a couple of lines of romantic poetry in perfect French, if I stumbled, slam the door in my face, no class for me. Though some of the other students who were beginners, who couldn't really even speak French, she would let them in. Very French, Madame de Creux. But that's going to be hopefully my next book, about the art of mime. Because in this book, one of my intentions was to get my stories down, so it'll hopefully, to come round to the beginning here, change the impression of people in this country about clowns and mimes and animals. And I want to do that for the art of mime. Tell some stories and what the depth of the art form is all about. And should I talk about animals?
Yes, please.
It's like I feeded you this. Yeah, my very flippant answer about animals in the circus is, it's not that certain animals should be banned from the circus. Certain animal trainers should be. Know what the heck they're doing. Just the way I don't agree with segregation of age in school, like I mentioned earlier. I don't agree that humans should be as segregated as we are from the animal kingdoms. You maybe could go visit a zoo, see live animals, an elephant, camel, whatever. But the best animal trainers that I worked with in the European circuses were just stunning in their communication with their animals. And as each one of them said to me, cruelty to animals, abuse to animals? If I was abusing my animals, they'd never do anything for me in the ring. Are you kidding? The method of working with the animals was to observe them, find out what their personality is, find out what they already do naturally, and encourage them to do that in the ring. And I remember watching so many animals in the circus, horses, elephants, who would get excited like 2 acts before their act would go on, because they knew the music of the show. They could hear the music of the band playing, oh, 2 acts until I go on. And it's like it was recess for them in the ring. They'd be playing, and let me describe just one animal act to give you a sense of communication. This was in Sweden, traveling with Circus Scott, and the Hungarian circus was our guests, and they had a horse act. One guy, his name was Donert, Hungarian circus family dynasty, who'd been working with horses for generations. He came out wearing a gray tuxedo and top hat, riding a gray horse, leading one gray elephant into the ring. The band starts playing this beautiful waltz. They waltzed around the ring for about a minute. The guy gets off the horse, exits, totally leaves the ring, behind the curtain. He's gone. The horse starts leading the elephant around in a waltz. And you're watching this. It's mesmerizing. And then at some signal between them, they switch roles. And the elephant, with his trunk, grabbed the reins and led the horse around in a waltz. You're just watching this for like 7 or 8 minutes. Finally, at the end of the act, the guy comes back out. The elephant lifts him up onto her back. They waltz again and leave. No words, no verbal instructions, no shouting. It was pure example of nonverbal communication between three animal species. Yeah, it's just beautiful. And the animal trainers, you know, they have their families and their kids, but they're the first ones in the morning tending the animals and the last at night. Even though they had helpers with them, the trainers were the ones who really bonded with their animals. And, well, I bonded with my dog Rufus, which some of you here may remember. And I write some chapters about Rufus and the idea of animal communication, how it works through imagery, projection of image, not words, but imagery. And the animal, hopefully, if they're intelligent, picks up that imagery, picks up my intention, and I pick up his intention. And then we could do things. Rufus did pantomime. Marceau was impressed by that. I would take an invisible piece of food. Well, let me tell you this, and then we can move on because we're getting on here. I was practicing an act, a mime act, in a restaurant setting, invisible restaurant, eating food, and Rufus was just kind of lying over there watching. He looked at me, came over, and I never taught him this at all. He sat up. So I took an invisible piece of food. He went. Right? I'm not kidding. It's on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. Look up Rob Mermin's YouTube channel. There's clips of Rufus eating that food and actually swallowing. You could see him swallow if you look carefully. It's all imagery. Any other questions? Okay, let me finish up. You know, and I'm happy if anybody is buying the book, happy to sign it. But since we talked so much about mime, let me finish the end of the last chapter here. I wrote about Marceau coming to Circus Smirkus. He had never worked in a circus ring before. He was a theater artist. But he came and did a benefit show with Circus Smirkus in Middlebury, 1999, which was just quite a day. You can read about that. But here, the one thing that he did at the end of the show, he never did before in his career, which was the audience stood up, standing ovation, and in full makeup and costume, he goes, he got everybody to sit down and he started to talk for like 15 minutes in full costume. And he wrote me a letter, and here's some of the things he said. Circus is loved in the whole world. Like music, it explains nothing. Rather, it touches your heart by the risks circus people take, not only through physical movements, but by the poetry they give with their soul. Circus is both an entertainment and a profound human experience. People will understand the spirit of what you're doing in Circus Smirkus. The children of Smirkus will come to know that learning the mysteries of our being does not come from any specific nationality, religion, or technique, but comes from knowing the essence of what is humanity on this earth. What is love, what is giving to people the best of your life. The circus, and Smirkus in particular, is the essence of all children from all backgrounds and cultures, united in one circus ring of spirit, struggling peacefully and artistically for a better world, while forever making us laugh and cry with the silent language of the heart. So that gives you a sense of how he spoke. And I'm happy to sign any books, though I do have a request to make it easier for me, because I know a lot of you here, some I don't. some people like to have me just sign the book with my name, which is fine because they want to read it, pass it on to somebody else, which is fine. If you want me to sign it to somebody, make sure I spell the name right. Give me the name, because there's one time I started to write to Johnny, and I was using a Y where it should have been an IE. So I want to get that right. So thanks for coming, everybody. Appreciate it.